I'm Chris Farrell from the All Things Good and Nerdy podcast, a wacky weekend morning show, part of the Gonna Geek Network, just like the show you're checking out right now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and the opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other awesome geeky shows over at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Intellectual Podcast. If you're new to the show, welcome. I'm your host, David S. Dawson. I'm a filmmaker in San Diego, California, and I started The Intellectual 8 seasons ago because I love exploring the stories of how people who pursue creative endeavors get to where they are. The conversations in each episode are not interviews. We strive for a more casual chat with our guests, and we let the natural flow of conversation run its course as much as we can. This often leads us into surprising territory, not just for you and for me, but often the things we explore surprise even our guests. We often follow up our conversations with our guests on the Clubhouse app. So please join us on Clubhouse. You can visit our club page by visiting us online at intellectualchats.club. And if you need an invite to the app, be sure to check out our Instagram and Twitter accounts at The Intellectual regularly, as we post links to our discussions there with invite codes. If you enjoy this conversation, I hope that you'll subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast player. We are easily found if you search The Intellectual Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Now, let's get on with this week's chat with another amazing creative.
Talk hard and enjoy the mindgasm. The Intellectual Podcast starts now.
Welcome to the Intellectual Podcast. I'm your host, David S. Dawson. Thank you for joining us today. Joining me as usual, my co-host, Whitney Wegman-Wood. Hi, Whit.
Hello, everybody.
Whitney, you've been on a tear getting us all sorts of really great guests lately. Who's our guest today?
Today we have Michelle Lipper. Michelle and I met via Clubhouse, and Michelle sent me a brief oversight of her journey through being a creative. And it's very interesting, but I'll let her tell it because, as she was saying, there's a lot of twists and turns to her story. So hi, Michelle. How are you doing today?
Hi, guys. I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Oh, thanks for joining us. So first things first, where'd you grow up? How'd you become an actress? Let's take that first part of the journey with you.
Okay, that's the easy part. I grew up, I grew up in Montreal. I'm born in Montreal, Canada. I'm English. A lot of people think that Montreal is the French place, but we are many English.
Right.
And as far as how did I get into acting, I don't even think it was a conscious choice. I think it's just, I was always singing and dancing. It's the usual thing that everyone says. I was singing and dancing, and there's like little cassette tapes. I remember we had this like ghetto blaster in the kitchen when my mom would make dinner or whatever. And I just remember standing there in front of like pressing the record button down and just singing into it all the time. And I actually have those cassette tapes somewhere in a box because where am I ever going to play them on? But
you got to get those converted to like digital format now, or they'll be lost forever.
That might be okay. But I just, I was always like making my babysitters do plays and putting on little shows with my Barbie dolls and with myself. And I would sing in my closet. I didn't have a lot of friends. So I did a lot of like singing and pretending. I had a very, very rich imagination life.
Do you think you didn't have a lot of friends because you had such a rich imagination?
Yeah, probably. I was a little weird, and I was a little bit precocious and trying to be mindful of the words that I'm using, because there's the words that I was labeled as, and then there's like what I know now that I was, which was super creative, super interested, super curious and imaginative, and a lot of things that were very, very frowned upon at the time that I grew up, in the place I grew up. I liked to make up stories, and I liked to make up songs, and I was completely useless at sports. And that seemed to be the thing that you do with kids when they're little. You put them into sports, and I was terrible at them. I hated them. I was bad at them, but I was also reading at like a high school level in grade 2. So, you know, nobody else was interested in reading, and I was under a tree reading while everybody else was playing sports. So I think that kind of made me a little odd. I was also very, very hyper imaginative, and I questioned everything. And I went to a Jewish elementary school, a Hebrew elementary school. So I very, very early on was like, what? This doesn't make sense to me. And I would ask questions, and then I would get in trouble. And the only classes I liked were English. And, you know, I was always at home watching musicals and stuff like that when everyone else was watching whatever everybody else was watching. And I got scared really easily. So people used to tease me and tell me like the plots of really scary movies that to this day I've never seen. And it was just, I had trouble sleeping when I was a kid because I was really, really scared of the noises in my house and ghosts and things that went on in the night that my imagination and the books that I was reading during the day would create, you know.
Very spirited imagination can work against you, right?
And I just started, I guess, I don't know how it happened, but I ended up doing my first play when I was 8, like an after school kind of program. And that's when I started doing musicals. And I was like, oh, I get to sing and act. This is fun. I get to be on stage and everybody's looking at me, and all the people that didn't want to be my friends are all clapping for me. You know, I think it's the classic actor thing. Like, we're never super comfortable in the world as who we are, but if we can pretend to be other people and be loved for that, then that's sort of
okay.
No, you're not. You're like, no, that was your story, Michelle. That's
no, I meant like, then you're okay.
Then you're okay. Yeah.
Yes. Then you're okay. So I just sort of like dove head first into it. After the disaster of the one camp my parents sent me to where everyone was playing sports, I got to pick my own camps, and I would pick camps that were very heavy in the performing arts and creative arts and acting summer theater programs. And I made sure that I was always the only Canadian. So I could totally reinvent myself every summer. And living where I lived and growing up where I grew up and the schools and everything like that was hell for me. So it was like, I would, you know, grit my teeth and imagination myself away during the year. And then in the summer, I got to be surrounded by other super weird kids that had very similar experiences to me and like-minded people. I just had to go and find them.
So did you travel to the United States then for these summer camps? Because you said you were the only Canadian.
Yes, I did. I went to a camp in New Hampshire for 2 years, a summer camp, and like toured around New England in a van with a bunch of people because they had written a musical about, I think it was about like recycling or something super crunchy. And we toured around New England in a van and like Vermont and all these places. And I was always the youngest kid, but I was super mature for my age. And I never wanted to be put with the young kids. So I would always like put myself with the older kids. And then I went to a summer theater camp in Massachusetts. And again, I like called the camp director and had them put me in with the older kids instead of the younger kids, because I am just always like, you know, this like precocious 12-year-old explaining why they needed to put me in the dorms with the 15-year-olds, you know, but they did. And it was, I mean, you know, there was always some kind of drama that happened, but those experiences were amazing. And like in the summer theater program, we did like 8 plays in 6 weeks, and people would pay to come see them. And one was a musical and one was a straight play. And that was my fun. And then high school, again, like I kept doing theater. I kept doing community theater after school, and then did theater in school when that was available, even though it was absolutely terrible. And it was just, I was very, very one-tracked. I was very single-minded about knowing what I wanted. And at one point like, I loved singing. I loved singing, but then acting just sort of took it. I guess it just became the easier route. I don't know. I didn't start singing in bands until later. And, so I just kind of stuck with the acting, and there was never a question in my mind. Like, I didn't even, here we have a thing called Cégep. Like, we graduate high school in grade 11, and then you go for 2 years of Cégep, which I guess is like junior college.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You guys do. And I didn't even want to do that. I knew the one university I wanted to go to major in musical theater, and it was in Boston, and I'd known about it for years, and I didn't even apply to any other schools. And people would be like, don't you want a plan B? And I was like, plan B?
Why would I need backup?
Yeah, no, I didn't. I didn't have any of those things. And and I ended up going there, and I only did 2 years there, and then I dropped out. The reality is never quite as fantastic as the imagined reality.
What you built it up to be.
I only did 2 years at university myself, so I get it.
Oh, I feel so validated.
Yeah, I did a tumultuous 2 years over a 2.5 year period. And then,
wow.
And then took off to go work in concerts and stuff as a lighting technician. So,
cool.
I get it.
Yeah, it was sort of like, why should I be sitting in this class learning about world economics when I want to be acting? And so I used up like all my electives in the first 2 years, all my performing arts electives. And then I had like 2 years of math in front of me or something. And I was like, well, this is bullshit. I saved my parents. I'm going to save my parents $150,000 and just start acting.
Yeah, they had a couple of professional theater people come down and talk to our classes towards the end of my second year, and I pulled a couple of the tech guys aside and I said, so you're working in New York. How much are you guys making? Working off Broadway or on Broadway, and it was pretty close to minimum wage. Like, why am I bothering with a private university degree if getting out of this means I'm going to make the same as flipping burgers? Like, I should just go work.
Yeah. I mean, there's a little bit of like later on down the line, there was a little bit of regret, but that was mostly every time I tried to get a US visa and they were like, so you don't have a college degree. And I'd be like, but I'm 40 and look at all the things I've done with my life. And they're like, yeah, but you don't have a college degree. Like, okay.
Yeah, when did getting a college degree become the measure of everything? Like,
it kind of is still.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So now, because of this snag with not having a college degree, did you have to return to Canada immediately after you left Boston, or?
I did not. I had this year when you go to university from Canada into the States, you get a visa that enables you to take a year after college. You're supposed to like intern, or that's the year you spend trying to get some kind of employment that would then lead to getting a different kind of visa, or right. Maybe you marry somebody, which a lot of my friends did. And so I moved to LA. My cousin had set up shop in LA, and he was an actor. He was on Full House. That was his big claim to fame back then. And I went and like showed up at his door, and I was like, hey, with a suitcase, can I stay here? All 18 years old of me. Or I think I was 19. And so I did that, and I ended up interning for a producer that he connected me with at Fox, which was very cool. And I learned a lot about the below the line, behind the scenes kind of stuff, and really actually fell in love with the process of development. Unfortunately, I just couldn't like get my shit together. After like 10 months of being an assistant in Hollywood, which is like pretty much the most demeaning job a human being could have. I decided that I needed to, I don't know, was I there? I was there for a year, maybe 2 years. I think I was there illegally for a year. And then I ended up coming back here because I decided I wanted to start acting again. And I ended up getting an agent in Montreal, and she was getting me so many auditions that it just didn't make sense for me to be there. And I moved back to Montreal and started working almost right away. Which was like kind of crazy at the time, because I went from only having theater experience. And then after I dropped out, after I left school, I auditioned for Rent. This is it's just showing my age. It was they were doing like these massive open call auditions for the first touring companies. And I made it down to like the last 2 people.
Oh, wow.
For the role of Maureen, and did not get it. And I was so devastated. So I was like, I'm done with theater. And so I started doing film and television in Montreal, which at the time was like booming. And I very quickly got into the union, and I very quickly started doing a lot of work. And yeah, I worked pretty solidly for like 3 years, almost too much. Like I went from 0 to 100 in a very, very, very short amount of time. And that's kind of when everything started to get a little dark.
Was it?
That's when everything gets dark.
I take it was probably pretty overwhelming, because you were in your 20s at this point, and then
I was in my early 20s. And I was also having, to like the sidebar, I'd been having struggles with my mental health for many years at that point, like several years since my teens. And like some health problems, this will all come into make sense later on. But I had some problems like with my energy levels and my mood swings, like crazy mood swings. And, and you have hormones when you're that age. And I had my first boyfriend, like a real like love of my life boyfriend. And I was working like 18 hours a day, 6 days a week. I was on 2 shows at the height of it. I had a series regular on 1 show, and I was a co-star on another show. Wow. And the turnaround, like when you're on 1 show, the union has rules, like you have to have a certain amount of hours between your turnaround.
Yeah. Like a 12-hour.
Right. But if you're doing 2 different shows, if I work like 16 hours on Monday on 1 show, and then the next day I'm working on the other show, I don't need to have that turnaround. So I was getting like no sleep. It's just like, it was just a big mess for a while. And I got exhausted, and I really didn't have a very good support system. I didn't have any friends in the industry. I was like, my parents didn't really understand what was going on. My boyfriend at the time certainly didn't understand. And my agent was not, she was not a good person. She was not a good person.
I think it's all too common though with this business, especially folks in their early 20s when they find some success and stuff, that there's not a lot of good support for what they're going through. Like, no. It's not something people relate to. So like casual friends can't really understand what you're doing and what you're trying to do and what the hours are like. And
yeah, it's like you go from being, nothing to people just bringing you anything you want, whatever you want. Everything was paid for, and this is on such a small scale. We're talking Montreal level productions here, so it's not like I was Julia Roberts overnight, but I still was, I had tons of money coming in, and I was getting my nails done every week, and I was getting facials, and I was getting, and everything was paid for, and everything was a write-off, and everything, it was a great life, but it was also really terrible. There was no learning curve. And I was so young, and when people are that young and all of a sudden you have everything you think you want, your ego just kind of goes out of control a little bit. I think if you don't have a solid foundation and a solid grounding, which I did not have. I got all of my validation from what was being fed to me because I did not have any, I was not taught to have that from within.
Right.
Which
well, I think that's
really,
a dangerous thing for a lot of actors, because even you mentioned earlier, you know, once you found the stage, like so many other actors, the validation of the performance was enough, right? To suddenly feel validated. That carries over as you get older. Suddenly you're super successful for the thing you're doing, not necessarily for being you, but for the thing you're doing. And the thing you're doing kind of takes over your entire self-identity.
Yeah. And then what happens when it starts getting taken away from you?
Which inevitably it will.
Which inevitably it will. And nobody prepared me for that. Yeah. And I mean, we're just not taught to prepare for that. And inevitably it did. All the shows finished or got canceled is what happened. And then I sort of got pushed into doing something that I really didn't want to do. Which was a project that was being sold by these award-winning female producers. And it was supposed to be a show like starring women, written by women, directed by women, for women, women empowerment. And it had a lot of nudity in it, and I didn't want to do it. And I was 25 and I'd gone through a breakup and all of my shows were canceled and I was feeling very, very worthless. And they like hounded my agent and hounded me and met with me and took me to lunch, and my agent pushed me. And I ended up doing it through a lot of what I thought was a lot of money at me. And I did it, and it ended up completely violating my sense of self, my rights. They aired stuff that like they weren't supposed to air contractually. They were very abusive to me on set. There was no one there to take care of me. I was terrified. And after I made a big stink about it because it was wrong. What happened was wrong. And my agent lied to me and told me that she was going to take care of it, but instead she just covered her own ass. And I didn't find that out until months later when I went to the union myself. And then she found out I went to the union and she fired me and started rumors about me. And then I got blacklisted, and then I wasn't acting anymore for trying to stand up for myself.
That's insane.
Yeah. And so I started doing, I was doing a play at the time, and I ended up moving to Toronto with one of the actors from the play, and he got me in with his agent in Toronto. And then I did some work. I did some shows and some big parts on some terrible shows. And then I had some more like just kind of unfortunate, bad horror story kind of experiences of like, you know, the American female lead of the show being jealous of the younger guest star and sabotaging me and having my scenes cut and being mean to me before my close-ups and like, you know, just things I'm laughing about now. But at the time it was just like chipping away. And all of a sudden, all the joy and all the love I had for this job was just gone. And instead I was like really, really just broken and insecure, and going in for stuff where I didn't fit in. I was the wrong age for everything because of what was happening in the business. It was like the height of Dawson's Creek era. So like everyone needed to look like they had just gotten out of college, and I looked a lot older than my age back then. So, you know, they were like, well, we can't send you out with the 30-year-olds because when you're next to a 30-year-old, you don't look old enough to be 30. But when I was next to like the 20-year-olds, I looked way too old. So the auditions got less and less. And all of a sudden I found myself going out for like yogurt commercial auditions where this like, director straight out of college was criticizing me for not looking like I was enjoying my yogurt enough. I was like, I've studied Shakespeare. So I quit. I quit acting.
At the point where you decided to go ahead and quit the business, were you, because I know you said that you were on a few American shows, were you still living in Canada, or had you?
Yeah, this was in Toronto. I was living in Toronto. I was engaged at the time because I was 28, and that's what people are supposed to do.
28-year-olds are supposed to do. Right.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I was engaged to somebody. I mean, that was also part of it. It was not the best relationship, and he very much did not love me acting. He wanted me closer to home, and not doing things where I would potentially have to make out with other men. So, the more I was starting to feel insecure about it, the more he was sort of massaging that.
Emotional vampire.
Yeah. I mean, it all kind of goes together, the codependency and the insecurity and the need for validation and, all that stuff that I didn't understand at the time. But now looking back, it's like, oh, girl, somebody save her. I stopped acting. I went back to university for like a year and just studied religion because I thought that was interesting. It was like I turned 30 and went, oh, okay, what am I going to do with my life? What am I going to be when I grow up? Which is the thing that everyone else around me was doing in their 20s. But in my 20s, I was working.
Right.
And when I stopped working, I'm like, well, I've been doing this for 20 years. That's a career. I can stop now. But everyone around me was just kicking into high gear with their own, either their careers or their like momhoods or their family life. And I had no idea what to do with myself.
Yeah. You and I have very similar stories like that. Cause I left college to go work in the concert world, and, I was pretty successful as a roadie for a long time, and, migrated into working corporate conferences and whatever. And kind of got to a point where I looked around and went, okay, I've been doing this for, between high school jobs and what I ended up doing in my 20s, I've been doing this for 15 years. What's next?
Yeah.
And everybody else was, like you said, having their kids being born, like moving into homes and like doing all these other things. And I'm kind of looking at my second career option already. Like, I totally get that. Like,
it's a very weird place to be. It was very disconcerting. And again, not having any kind of support system or foundation other than people saying, well, shouldn't you be, or you should be, or so there's a lot of shoulds and a lot of shouldn'ts, and none of them made any sense to me. Because ultimately I still didn't know who I was. I was still getting the reflection of who I was from everything outside of me.
Yeah.
So you hit a little bit of an identity crisis at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think it had been brewing. I mean, I think it had always sort of been there, but at that point it was really like, okay, what do I want to do? So I just started doing everything and anything. I worked in fashion. I was like, I like clothes. So I worked in fashion. I worked in marketing. I worked in sales. And everything was kind of fun for a little bit because it was like acting. It was like I got to pretend to, or like I got to put on a costume and be a fashion salesperson. I got to be a bartender, which isn't, those are all roles that you put on, which would be fun for a little bit. And then I was like, oh, this is work. This sucks. So, and then at the same time, I started to get sick, like very sick, but like weird sick. Like I was exhausted, and I was, my body weight, my whole life I'd had problems with my weight. It was constantly fluctuating, like in a quasi extreme way. Not extreme, like extreme makeover extreme, but like at that point I was in my early 30s. I was like 31, and I had been very thin because I wasn't working and I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, but I still had a very, very rich social life. So I was basically like sustaining myself on vodka and cocaine and cigarettes and coffee.
Wow.
You know,
That'll thin you out.
It will, especially when like you don't know what healthy is, you know, like healthy to me was not having the fries with my food. It was like ordering salad instead of fries. And I started to be ill, and I gained a lot of weight very quickly, like very, very quickly. And my body just kind of stopped functioning. It broke down on me. And I left Toronto and moved back to Montreal, and went to all these doctors, and nobody knew what was wrong with me. And everybody was like, take these pills, go see a nutritionist, go see a therapist. You're just depressed. You're just this, you're just that. And I was like, no, this doesn't feel right. There's something more here. And
part of it had to be your age too. They can be really dismissive of symptoms at young ages.
For sure.
Like,
and they tested me for a bunch of stuff. They just didn't weirdly test me for the right things.
Right.
And people can be very dismissive. Doctors. I mean, the thing that I tell people now, and I speak to a lot of people when people find me, I'll always talk to them about health and wellness because I ended up getting into it for so many years. But to me, it's like, your body, and when we become connected to that inner voice that we all have, intuition or the guide or whatever the fuck you want to call it. Oh, can we swear? Sorry.
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay. Once you connect to that thing and you know what it is, you can't not listen to that. And I always encourage people to be their biggest health advocates, because doctors, I mean, they know, but they don't know. And especially if those doctors happen to be older and you happen to be part of a healthcare system that is heavily infrastructured and rule oriented. And, as the Canadian system is, I mean, it's wonderful because we all get to go to the doctor, but it's also not wonderful because they're not that interested sometimes in really taking the time to figure out what's going on because they just can't.
I'll give you a little secret. The doctors here don't care either. So
yeah, but it's true. I had to go long and hard to find some amazing doctors when I lived in
it really
LA
is
a few years
important,
ago.
though. You have to be your own advocate because
you do.
Ultimately, nobody else is riding inside your flesh vehicle but you.
Well, and you know your own body, so
Yeah, and when people are saying to you, like, when I'm sitting across the desk from a man in his 70s who's looking at me and saying, I'd stopped getting my menstrual cycle for like 3 years. But this was kind of in the beginning of it all. And he's like, yeah, there's nothing wrong with you. You just need to, get some therapy and go on a diet. And I was like, oh, okay, that's not right. That's not right. That is not the answer. So I'm going to nutshell my story and say that few things happened and I ended up living in Thailand. Some stuff happened and
this was pre getting a diagnosis that you moved to Thailand? Like we're still unsure of...
I'm 32 and I went on vacation and decided to stay. My friends all left and I decided to stay and go to a detox resort because I'm still the ego of the actor and the validation of like what I look like. And this fact that never mind that like going up a flight of stairs exhausted me to the point where I had to lie down and I hadn't gotten my period in like a year. It was that I thought I was fat and I needed to figure out why I was fat. And I wasn't fat. I mean, I was 50 pounds heavier than I am now, but I still wasn't fat. It was that I was bloated beyond, it was this like bloating. And it was also that my body, no matter what I did, my body was just doing its own thing. Right. And that was so frustrating and unempowering when I didn't have the language to explain it. And so by going to this place, it started me on this journey of learning what that little voice was that had been talking to me for years and years and years, and why I'd been so miserably unhappy. And, you know, the voice that I had heard when I was little that I tried to express to older people who never listened to me, because, you know, what does an 8-year-old know about what's best for them? Meanwhile, I did know what was best for me. I was just taught to stop vocalizing that part of me, and then to stop listening to that part of me. And I had to get back in touch with that part of me, and it was brutally painful. Like, I didn't realize how much pain I was in until I started, I was pushed up against it and had to start feeling it. And I met the most incredible people that were doing the most incredible things that I'd never even heard of, that I didn't know was a possibility. It was like at this resort, I mean, it wasn't even a resort. It was like it was like a 3-star. And if anyone who's listening has ever been to Thailand, you know, you can go to places that are like 6-star, fancy. And this was not that. And I didn't even know. I just picked that. And I met people like that were the most. I met a guy that did energy work with the Dalai Lama. He used to be a cop in Detroit and just had enough, and found out that he was good at this energy healing stuff, and now lived in Thailand and went all over the island giving healings to people at very, very fancy spas. And I ended up becoming friends with him and all this other like hodgepodge group of people that all lived in these places, and they were happy. And I'd never met people who were happy before. I'd never sat down with a group of women for lunch who weren't shit talking about other women while they were together. They were like just having conversations, and I didn't know how to talk to them. And I didn't know how to be around people. I didn't know how to let somebody hug me. It was so fascinating, and it forced me to be uncomfortable. It was the beginning of what forced me to be uncomfortable. And then through that, I ended up just kind of having these crazy serendipitous experiences that I decided, like, I threw away my own rule book and I just started living by these experiences. You know, I started living by feeling instead of by my head. And anytime my head got involved, everything would come to a halt. And then I would just kind of close my eyes. And I mean, literally, like, I remember standing in the airport in Bangkok and like looking up at the wall where they had all the flights, the outgoing flights listed. And I had no outgoing flight. And I would just stand up there and close my eyes and then take a deep breath and open my eyes and pick something and buy the ticket and go and just show up there and not know anybody. And it was always terrifying, and I was always miserable for like the first 48 hours. And then everything would kind of just work out in the weirdest, like it just like so many coincidences that I had to stop thinking they were coincidences, because, you know, stuff like that just doesn't happen. And I ended up living in Chiang Mai in a room. I learned how to ride a motorbike, and I found someone I met took me to a jazz club, and it happened to be an open mic night, and they knew that I used to sing. So they went up and told the guys that I used to sing. So they called me up to sing. And then after, they asked me to come back the next night, and then they asked me to come back the next night. And then the next thing you know, I was part of this band, and I was singing with the band, and I was living with the bassist, and I was recording an album with them. And, you know, and like, I just like weird, crazy stuff. And then I went to Bali and I did my yoga teacher training, and I met all these people in Bali, and I lived in a tree house, and, you know, and then I swung the other way because I missed fancy things and like went to the fancy part of Bali and ended up dating a fashion designer and going, like, it's like, no matter where I went, I always ended up meeting the people like that connected to other people. I ended up becoming this like very strange accidental super connector. And I would still was so uncomfortable with who I was. Like, I didn't quite fit into that piece, because the more spiritual stuff I was learning about, and the more that part of me was opening up, the more I knew I didn't fit into that other world, but I didn't also fit into the super spiritual world because that seemed very weird to me. So I kept trying. I was still acting like I was still trying to fit into
playing
this
parts
role.
wherever you went.
Yeah. And none of them really worked. Like they would work for a little bit, but then it wouldn't work and things would start to kind of feel like they were going wrong and I would get very uncomfortable and then I would leave and I would move somewhere else. And then I met someone from LA and Bali that I spent a lot of time with who told me about this type of meditation she practiced. And then she got me to come to India with her family and all these meditators from LA and learn how to meditate from these group of people. And then I immediately became part of this group of people. And then I moved to LA and lived with her and her family. And then I decided to do the teacher training to teach this meditation. And then I moved to Vancouver and I taught all these people how to meditate. And then I moved back to Montreal and I was the first Canadian teacher of this meditation. I taught 250 people in 1 year. But then again, everything got very weird and very uncomfortable and I couldn't relate to any of my friends and no one could relate to me. And if I'm teaching meditation, does that mean I can't drink? And if I drink, then does that make me a bad meditator? And I was still having all these mood problems. I was still having problems with my health, but I would, now I was on this healing path and I was doing all of these different things. Anytime anybody would offer me anything, I would take it. I wanted to learn about it. I wanted to know it. I wanted to teach it. I wanted to experience it. And I spent 10 years just going everywhere in the world doing anything anybody offered to me. If somebody said, put this paper bag on your head, I'm going to light you on fire and dance around you and sing in Swahili, I would have been like, cool, let's do it. I did ayahuasca. I drove through a rainforest on a motorbike in a rainstorm in Thailand to see a guy that lived in a cave so he could put acupuncture on me and light them on fire. All of these crazy, crazy things. I went into AA when I lived in LA at one point because I had a lot of friends that were sober. I met this whole sober community and I thought, well, maybe that's one of my problems. And I spent 6 months in AA and then I was like, wait, nope, that's not my problem. So I popped out of that. And it's so funny because along the way of this 10 years, I would meet people who needed to know about the things that I'd done for their own lives. Mm-hmm. So it would be why am I doing this? I don't understand why I'm experiencing this. And then a year later, I'd get into a conversation with somebody and I'd go, oh, I know what you're going through. I did that. Let me tell you about this. Let me connect you with that.
Yeah.
And then I cut to, I guess I was 38, maybe 37. I ended up going back to LA. A friend was traveling and said, do you want to come sublet my apartment? And LA for me was always my happy place. And I just wanted to live there. It was just, I could never live there legally. So I went and I had discovered Kundalini Yoga a few years earlier and fell in love with it because it was, meditation, but it was also singing and very fluid, dancey kind of movement. And there was this community aspect. It was this community thing that I didn't know that I was craving. So the community of AA, the community of the meditation, the community of the yoga community in Bali, the fashion community, the drinking community, the bar community, this community of Kundalini people who all seemed very healthy. They didn't, a lot of them were sober. They didn't have issues. A lot of them were actors or in the industry, but they all had this commonality of wanting to enrich themselves spiritually, to become better people, to become better, stronger women, to get more identified with your feminine, to heal your body, to heal your nervous system, to heal your glandular system, all this shit that it was ding, 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 everything made sense to me. And I felt so great when I went there and it was doing drugs without doing drugs and you get so high. it was wonderful. And I just, again, because I can't do anything like half-assed, I needed to be like in the inner circle immediately. I needed to, offer myself and show up, and because I was still like super uncomfortable just living my life, I would just go to classes, because it seemed like a more positive choice. And ended up doing Kundalini teacher training. And that's when I started to really notice that, again, I was not feeling well. And I'd kind of come to terms with the fluctuations in my body, although, living in LA, it was still a bit of a pisser when I would be on the higher end than the lower end. But it was more like, at this point, I'm like meditating 6 hours a day between the Vedic meditation practice I had, which was 20 minutes twice a day, and then the 2 to 3 classes of Kundalini I was going to. I was pretty much just like always meditating. And when I had all these tests done and they saw like my cortisol level was through the roof and my adrenals were shot and all of this, and I was stressed. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. Like, this is the stuff that
I'm a full-time meditator.
Yeah. I'm like, I teach people to do what I do so that they don't experience this. Like, what does that mean? And I had this lump in my neck that I kept showing to people for a year, saying like, do you see this? Like, do you see this thing in my neck? And does that look weird to you? Because it kind of hurts. And as the year went on, it got harder and harder for me to do the workouts that I was doing. I couldn't do a push-up anymore. I couldn't lift my arm up for more than, in Kundalini, we do a lot of like arms raised for 31 to 62 minutes. I couldn't hold my arm up. If I was singing, I would lose my breath. I would lose my voice. I couldn't sing the way I used to sing. And I was like, something is really, really, really wrong here, but everyone's still telling me that nothing's wrong.
And this is like wrong. 7 years into your initial symptoms that you went to the doctor for, right?
Yeah. Like, so that it started when I was like 31, and now I'm almost 40.
Yeah.
And so I was coming back to Montreal for, it was September, and I was coming back for the holidays, the Jewish holidays, but I was also giving a lecture on meditation and cancer for a foundation. And while I was here, my parents live across the street from like a private medical clinic, because we very much have a 2-tiered medical system here now.
Right.
Because if you want to get something done through the social system, you can, but you might be dead by the time your appointment rolls around. And I needed to have this done, just mostly because everybody was telling me it was nothing. And I was like, okay, well, if it's really nothing, then I want to know it's nothing so that I can stop thinking about it and just adjust my way of thinking to accepting. And because that's kind of where I'd gotten with everything else. I was just like, okay, this is what my body's doing. This is where my body's going to be. And instead of hating it, I was learning to accept it and live with it. And I had the ultrasound, and the nurse came in, and then the technician came in, and then they kept going out and coming in and going out. And I was like, well, this is really weird. If it's nothing, like, why am I still here? And then they were like, you need to get a biopsy, but like, you can't wait to go through the system. You have to get it now, like go down the hallway. Do you have $1,100? Go down the hall and get it. And I called my parents, and my mom came like running over, and I had a biopsy, and they looked at, the guy looked at it, and he said, okay, well, it's probably a growth. It's probably benign. It'll probably have to come out anyway, because obviously it's like pressing on some nerves, and that's why you're having all this pain, but don't worry, it's not cancer. And I went, excuse me, what? And he said, yeah, it's probably not, it could be 3 things, but like, it's probably not cancer. And I said, cancer of what? I don't understand. He goes, well, it's pressing on your thyroid. And I was like, well, what's a thyroid? And he kind of explained it to me. I honestly don't even remember. I think I went into like a haze.
Right.
And then I left and I was like, okay, well, it's probably not cancer. So that's what I was thinking. It's probably not cancer. And a week later they called me and I was back in LA and I was in the Whole Foods parking lot and the guy just is like, yes, you have cancer. And I'm like, could you not have told me to pull over the car? Like, was driving. Yeah, and it turned out I had a tumor the size of a potato, like a fingerling potato on my thyroid that had been growing probably for a good number of years. And I had like a very advanced case of thyroid cancer. So I went back, instead of going to Italy for my 40th birthday, like I'd always planned, I went back to Montreal and went to live with my parents and spent my 40th birthday advocating for myself again, knocking down doors, trying to get the best surgeon and not the one that I had been hooked up with. The 500-year-old man that wanted to cut through my vocal cords to get the tumor out. Yeah, I can see your face. Because it had grown. It had been in there for so long that it had kind of like started attaching itself.
Right.
There's like tendrils.
Yeah. So they didn't know that at the time, but that's what they found after. Anyway, I ended up getting like the best guy and I love him and he has an amazing God complex. And, you know, that's what you want when you want a surgeon. You want someone who thinks that they're God. If anybody has one takeaway from this podcast, get someone
you don't want the timid
complex.
surgeon.
No, or the guy who's been doing it for 500 years and like doesn't even have time to answer your questions because he just is so old hat at it. So I had my surgery and it had been growing tendrils and it was wrapping itself around my vocal cords. And thyroid cancer is a funky thing because a lot of people consider it to be the good cancer. So I got a lot of like, oh, it's just thyroid cancer. Oh, okay, you'll be fine.
Right. It's the
That's
survivable
the good cancer.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like, don't talk about it like you have real cancer, because you'll offend people who have real cancer. So again, I found myself in this place where my voice wasn't, I wasn't allowed to voice the things that I was feeling and the things that I wanted to say. I was, again, like told to, shh, not valid. And I went through everything and did everything that I was supposed to do and went back to LA, and then they found more cancer. So I had to have another surgery a month after, or 2 months after my last surgery. And they took out like a bunch of lymph nodes in my neck. And then I had a boyfriend who was in my spiritual community, and I hadn't had a boyfriend in like 8 years. And he was my first like real, I thought, like healthy spiritual love. And I had to come back to Montreal to do my radiation therapy, which is so funny because now we've all been in quarantine for a year. It's not as dramatic, but I had to be in quarantine for like 10 days because I was radioactive. And he broke up with me over FaceTime while I was in quarantine.
Wow.
Oh no.
And I was living with him. So I had to go back, and I was like kind of homeless, like living in Airbnbs, and it was such a weird time. And still in my Kundalini community, but starting to be a little bit like, these people are weird, and they just wanted me to be happy all the time. And I wasn't happy. I was actually like really angry and upset because it was starting to dawn on me that everything I'd learned over the last 10 years was a lie, which is not true. Of course, I learned a lot and it formed who I am. But there was a lot of information that was kind of false. And in cults, they want you to believe everything, right?
Well, they're trying to sell you something. Right.
Exactly. And if you stop buying into
contrary
what
to
they're
the thing they're
selling,
trying to sell, you're a danger to the sale to the next
exactly. So all of a sudden I found these people that had been my community and my friends not answering my phone calls and not being as inviting and not being as welcoming. And I started to feel like more and more and more lost again. And what am I doing with my life again? And I'd gone through this cancer stuff and I was still, like I was up and down. And the thyroid controls everything, right? The thyroid controls your hormones. It controls your metabolism. It controls how you sleep. It controls your energy levels. It controls your moods, your sexual feelings, your sexual ability, like everything that had been quote unquote wrong with me since
like
I was
the
a
traffic
teenager.
cop of chemical interactions in your body. Yeah,
exactly. And if the traffic cop and the lights aren't moving at the same time, or he's given the wrong signals to the wrong thing, everything just misfires. So it made so much sense as to all of the things I've been struggling with my whole life. And then to look back and go, well, then who am I if all of that stuff and all of this, and then that last 10 years when I've been learning all that spiritual stuff and it's like, oh, wait, it was just cancer in me the whole time. Like, what does that mean about all the spiritual stuff that I've learned? And what does it mean about all the choices I've made and the experiences that I've had? And it was all just way too overwhelming for me. And I was turning 41. So another year had passed and I was like, fuck it. I'm going to Italy. I'm not waiting for a man to take me like I'd been waiting my whole life. I'm like, I'm going by myself and I'm going to go just for like 3 weeks and I'm going to go to Italy. And I hadn't traveled and, really traveled since the Thailand Bali thing. And I didn't know if I could do it anymore because I was older now. Like now I'm 41. It's not cute to like pick up a guy and ask him if he can light your cigarette to start up a conversation. I didn't even smoke anymore. So, but no, I went to Italy and all that weird serendipitous stuff started happening again. I met I like ended up in a cafe and found a flyer for a tattoo, a tattoo artist. And I got into tattoos and I like to get tattoos when I travel and I found it. And then I was outside a place just having a drink by myself a place I found. And so I went back like 2-3 nights in a row or days, afternoons. And this man came up to me and he's like, I've seen you here the last 2 nights. Like you shouldn't be by yourself. You're a pretty young woman and not in a sleazy way, just in a like, it's sad that you're here by yourself. Come and meet my friends.
Right. And
introduced me to all his friends. And then somebody called on the phone and he said to the guy who's like, oh, I'm sitting here with this girl. You're going to meet her when you get back. And he's like, and he's speaking to me in Italian. He didn't speak English. We were kind of like, he spoke some French. I spoke French. I spoke no Italian. He spoke no English. And we had Google Translate. And some of his friends spoke some English. So we were sort of like communicating like this. And the guy he's talking to on the phone. And he goes, oh, I met this girl. She's from Canada. And he goes, this is my friend Paulo. He's also from Canada. He's a tattoo artist. And I pull out the flyer and I was like, wait, is it this guy? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, oh my God, that's the guy I was trying to get in touch with to give me a tattoo. And it was his best friend. And he puts me on the phone with him. And this guy was from Toronto and had moved to Italy with his wife a few years earlier. And then it turned out that we had known all the same people in Toronto that we'd actually met like 10 years earlier. And it just like crazy stuff. And we ended up like becoming best friends. And I ended up moving to Florence. I went back to LA and I was like, fuck this. I'm done with this. Trump got elected while I was in Florence. Trump got elected. So I was like, well, there's no way my visa is being renewed.
Well, it was a good time to get out anyway, right?
Yeah. And I'm like, and I don't even want to be there. And I want to be in a place where I can drink wine and I can eat carbs, and nobody was talking about their spiritual life. Nobody I knew meditated. Nobody was talking about their process or their feelings or their anything. Nobody talked about anything like that. People were just being people, hanging out with people, this Mediterranean kind of piazza. Everyone looks out for everybody. Nobody let me eat dinner by myself. Nobody let me do anything by myself. Like everyone took care of me. Everyone took care of each other. And I just fell in love with it. And I was like, why have I been punishing myself my whole life? Like, I'm going to move to Italy and I'm going to learn Italian and I'm going to go see old Italian things and I'm going to eat pasta every day and drink wine every day and smoke cigarettes with the Italians and meet a nice Italian man, which never happened. And I ended up living in Italy for 2 years.
Now, I saw in your link tree that you blog and you write. At what point did you start doing all that and like sharing about your journeys and experiences and things?
I'd always been writing. I've always been writing since I was very little. I used to write poems and journals and super sad songs. And then and creative writing and stuff like that. I loved writing. It was something that came very naturally to me. And, but always like in my own voice. I wasn't a very good fiction writer. I'm a very good like personal essay style writer. Not that I knew what that was. And when I lived in LA and was in the Kundalini thing, I had gone on a retreat and met this girl who lived in Laguna Beach, and she, I think she was Persian, and she had she came from a very wealthy family where her father like didn't have a son, but sort of looked to her like she was the son and empowered her to be very enterprising. And she'd started up a blog. It wasn't a blog, it was an online magazine. I had blogs sort of throughout, and I would write very, very, very honest. You know, I treated it kind of like a diary. And this was very early on in the blog world. And I would write things about my feelings, and then I would get an email from someone from my life. Like I can't
believe you wrote that.
Yeah. Like, I can't believe you wrote that. Take it down.
I went through all that with my blogs too.
Yeah. And it's sad because I did take it down and I wish I hadn't. And I wish I was technical enough to like put something together now, although I've tried a million times and I just can't figure out how to do it. But she asked me, she knew that I liked writing and she liked the way I told stories. I like telling stories. And even when I taught meditation and when I taught Kundalini, I'm a visual thinker and I'm a visual speaker. So science and facts and all of that stuff does not translate to me, but analogies and stories, fairy tales. I was obsessed with fairy tales when I was little. So still am, and mythology and stuff like that. So I loved telling stories, and she liked the way that I spoke and asked me if I wanted to write for her new magazine. And I said, sure. And I just started writing personal growth. I was like the personal growth author. I also did, once I moved to Italy, I wrote some travel stuff for them because I got to travel around Europe a little bit while I was there. And so I would write about some of the places I went. But mostly it was personal growth stuff. And then after writing for them for like 4 years, I stopped because they were getting pretty big, but it was kind of like, it was becoming like a Goop sort of situation. And I couldn't write for these, I'm like, sorry if they're listening, but like these, you know, white privileged, entitled millennial girls, the American millennial, you know, with their saffron matcha latte drinking, like, you know, there's a whole real world. After cancer, everything kind of changed. Like after I allowed myself to sort of start feeling pain and then I drowned in my pain a bit. Like all of that stuff, I started seeing it in a very different lens, and I ran out of things to write about, you know, like I wasn't going to start writing about the law of attraction every week.
I think it's natural as we progress in life and go through the various phases, you know, like you get to a point where you don't relate anymore to phase you were in 20 years ago. Like no matter how hard you try, you can't really write to that anymore because it's not who you are, you know. And as you experience things like cancer survival or loss of loved ones or divorces or whatever, the more your pain experience grows, kind of the larger your view of everything becomes. It's really hard to relate.
Ideally, we would take all these experiences that life gives us and grow from them. You know, that's
one hopes.
One hopes. And, you know, it's hard for me because my head is filled with so much information now that it is hard for me to experience things and not have all of that information come in and say, well, you know, I not even in a should way, but like one ought to be able to grow from pain, and people who don't grow, it's hard to give those people time. You know, how much patience do you have for people that aren't going to grow? And it's ironic that like I after a lot of work when I was living in Italy, I finally went into therapy for the first time in like 15 years, because when you do all that spiritual work, they're very anti-therapy. You know, you should be able to like meditate it out of you. And I forced myself to confront, you know, those like long-standing childhood issues of not knowing who I was and the situations I would get myself in, and the running and the moving and the seeking, and what was I looking for? And I was really always looking for is me. Right. It's just that I was always looking outside of me for me, because I'd never just flipped the mirror around and saw myself. The mirror was always facing the outside.
Well, you were encouraged actively to suppress the you when you were young.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you suppressed it so much, you didn't ever get to explore it. I went through the period of being angry at my parents like we all do. And, you know, now I know like it's nothing they did wrong. It's just, it was very of the times in the 70s, like that very like Dr. Spock sort of how to raise children like a British person. And my mom was British. So that probably didn't. My dad used to tell me, I'm sorry, son, you didn't come with instructions.
Instructions. Yeah, I heard that one a lot. You didn't come with instructions. I did the best I could. And they did.
Yeah.
You know, but part of my healing was then at some point I just knew it was time to come back to Montreal, which was this place I'd always been running away from. And to what you just said, to me, Montreal is very much a place where there isn't a lot of growth. It's people who have known each other their whole lives, who, you know, grew up together, went to all the same schools together, went to all the same camps together, dated each other, married each other, had families together. Now their kids all go to school together. They all go to Florida together. And to me, I was like, how do you do that? Why? How? Where's the growth? Where's the growth? How do you relate to each other? But they relate to each other. You know, it's okay. It's just not me. It's not my, it's my people.
Their personal experiences are a bit more aligned with one another's than yours is with theirs, because you went on this much far reaching journey for yourself.
And I had to, I didn't really have a choice. And I came back here and then like, the more I was here, the more I started like, it's like closing a lot of circles that I think were sort of broken open over the years. And acting was sort of like the final thing that I needed to heal. And I had so much anger and pain about it that even when people would ask me, and it happens all the time, I would talk to people and they're like, why'd you stop acting? Or, you know, what was either why'd you stop acting? Why'd you quit acting? Why don't you start acting again? And I had answers, lots of answers. And I never liked talking about what happened because it still was very humiliating to me. I still got messages, you know, I've had to change my Facebook name twice. I had to change my Instagram name. I still got a message like 2 days ago from somebody that said they saw me naked on, you know, they say, some weird creepy dude like, I saw you on da-da-da-da. And it's like, I can't make that stuff go away. It doesn't bother me anymore the way it did. Right. but I didn't think I could ever go back to it because so much time had passed. And I don't know, last year around, it was like a year and a half ago, someone interviewed me for a series they were doing. A girl in Montreal was doing this thing of like 52 women, one woman a week for a year. All different kinds of women. And she had seen a lot of my Instagram stuff and my writing, and she asked if she could interview me. And I ended up telling this, like all of this stuff came out that I don't know why the conversation went that way. It just did. And she said to me, why don't you start acting again? It seems like there's something there that maybe it's time you revisit. And I don't know, I think it's just timing and as much work as I'd done on myself, and maybe I was ready for it. I called up my agent that was like my first agent when I was 20. And I asked if I could meet with her, and she said yes. And I went and I just wanted to talk to her about it and like talk about everything that had happened. And by the end of the conversation, she's like, so when are you, let's do this. And I was like, oh, okay. Let's do this. And then COVID happened. So here we are.
So you're still in the let's do this.
I'm still in the let's do this. My expectations have changed greatly. My process has changed greatly. My feelings about myself have changed greatly. And my feelings about acting have changed greatly. I think in a weird way, having this past year has been sort of wonderful because it enabled me to really, really work on acting again for the first time in God knows how many, like I can't remember the last time I took an acting class. So I've been doing some classes on Zoom and stuff and reading a lot and watching a lot of YouTube acting classes and teachers and stuff like that. But also having to self-tape, all the nerves and the anxiety and the, oh my God, will they like me, of walking into a room. I had a good couple of auditions before COVID. But the bulk of them have really been over the last year, and it's gotten me comfortable with finding myself and finding my groove. And I don't even know if I really need it anymore. I was saying this to my partner, to my boyfriend, the other 2 weeks ago. One day I was like, I don't know. I think I might be good. I don't know if it's not that I don't want to act. It's the business of acting that's always kind of been gross to me. And it still is, but I love entertainment and I love entertaining. And I watch more TV than the normal average human. I love writing. I love stories, like I said. So there's a process there. There's something for me in it that I haven't quite found the thing yet, but I know that this is all part of getting to that thing. And, Clubhouse has been really fascinating because I dove into all the acting rooms and the casting director rooms and the actors talking to actors and agents talking to actors. And I got to share some of my stories and all of that. And then also kind of recently I've been looking for other things. I was like, oh yeah, these are some of the things I didn't love about the business. I want to know about what's going on in the world. I want to know about neuroscience. I want to know about AI. I want to know about cryptocurrency. No, I don't want to know about cryptocurrency. But I want to connect with people. And that's what I've been loving about Clubhouse is it's kind of like getting to travel again, getting to plop myself down at a bar with a long, with a room full of strangers and start up a conversation and
it's like attending conferences with people.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's a little less cold. Well, some of them are kind of cold, but I think there's the thing that I discovered again that for me, acting was about telling stories, and traveling on my own was also like, it's like when I used to sit in my closet and make up stories and make believe things and turn myself into somebody who was a part of a story.
Yeah,
it's the same thing when I used to travel.
Stories. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, now being locked in my house for going on a year and a bit, like I hit a wall there. And so like, thank God I had a little bit of the acting. At least I had auditions and things to sort of work on. But the most interesting part was like, I'm not running away. I don't need to run away from myself anymore. And I actually think that my stories are just as interesting, if not more interesting, than some of the stuff I'm getting the acting stuff for.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So to wrap up, I've got 2 questions for you.
Okay.
The first one is my question. What advice would you give to a young actress coming into the business right now? And the second question is Whitney's favorite question, which is, if you have something you want to do, some dream project, some dream goal that you'd like to achieve, this is your chance to put it out into the world.
What's your ideal future?
Make it manifest. So
yeah.
Okay. Which one do I answer first? Does it matter?
Advice. Start with advice.
Start with the
Okay.
advice, yeah.
How old is this person?
Say they're in their early 20s, specifically a woman in her early 20s, like just starting out in the biz. What would you tell them?
I would tell them to really take some time to get to know themselves and to work on their connection with themselves, their feelings of self-worth, their feelings of self-validating. You know, I've been in a lot of rooms and clubhouse and places where people say, like, we don't dictate your self-worth, and you know, if you don't get the part, don't let that make you feel bad about yourself. But the truth is, you're going to hear a lot more no's than you are going to hear yeses. And if your internal yes, if your internal knowledge of who you are and your connection with that voice inside of you isn't strong enough, then those no's are going to start being the only thing you hear. And that's going to start dictating how you feel about yourself. It's inevitable. It's impossible not to. And on the flip side of that, when people do start saying yes to you, remember who you are and keep that connection to yourself, because the yeses, you know, could turn into no's. Everything comes in waves. Bad days, good days, sunshine, rain, more sunshine. Yes, no, today is a no, tomorrow is a yes, but then the day after that might be a no. And it's not about, at the end of the day, getting the job and the validation and the fame and the money and all that. It's so cliche to say, but if you don't know who you are, like really, really know who you are, and you don't like that person, none of that stuff is going to matter. And in fact, it's going to amplify it, and it's going to be bad. It's just going to be bad. I mean, and of course the stuff is wonderful when it happens, but it needs to be the icing on the cake, not the whole cake.
Right.
You have to have a strong, thank you. Like when I used to teach people how to meditate, and they'd be like, but what about this? And what about that? And what about surfing? And what about mindfulness and all of that? And I'm like, yeah, all of those things are great. But if you don't have a solid foundation, then what are you gonna, it's like decorating a house. Why would you go and buy the paintings and the carpet and the sofa and the curtains if all you have is a plot of land and you have no walls? You need to lay the foundation.
Yeah.
And only you can do that. Only you know what that means, and find out what that means. And you don't have to be perfect, and you don't have to be at the top of the mountain, but at least have a strong foothold.
Yeah. Very wise advice. And totally perfect summary of your journey. Which I think is
Yeah. And the other question.
Whitney's favorite question.
Yep,
Whitney's
my favorite question.
I feel like depending on what day you're asking me this, you might get a different answer from me. Not might, you would, because in my ever never ending quest to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. One thing is kind of always stuck with me, and that is that I would love to create. I'd love to somehow be part of a production company that creates television that influences people in a higher level of consciousness way without Lifetime channel Oprah smacking them in the face. So I used to call it, when I was first coming up with this idea, like the Girls for HBO meets whatever spiritual thing you could think of. But it's not that. I think now it's like, I realized that the subject matter doesn't necessarily need to be of a higher conscious. It's just the people working on it need to want to accomplish something more in the life, and like just infusing that energy into the content and then putting it out there. So yeah, more things that amplify strong voices for younger women in their 20s, women that are growing up, more shows where it's not about the girl getting the guy, or the girl having the baby, or the girl getting validated by all these wonderful things happening to her, but maybe just people on their journeys, and
shows that are a bit more mindful of self.
Yeah, but still very cool and sexy and fashionable, and Emily in Paris, but actually good. Sorry. That's why shows like Euphoria are so cool, and I May Destroy You and stuff like that. Like, yeah, okay, they're a little heavy, but like real women's experiences, real people's experiences. Pose, there's a lot more people doing things, and I would love to be part of that. Someone that's bringing content to the masses to maybe spark a little bit of light in someone else's journey. And I also very, very much want to write my book. I just have to start.
There you go.
So one day.
Oh, Michelle, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you. You've led a awesome life. It was a cool journey. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello there, citizens. I am the terror that flaps in the night. I am the floaty that will not flush no matter how many times you try in the toilet bowl of crime. I am Darkwing Duck, telling you please, talk hard and enjoy the mindgasm. Whatever the heck that means. After all, you are watching Intellectual Podcast with your ears.